Imagine standing in the middle of a frozen wasteland, the wind howling like 1,000 hungry wolves, snow biting into your skin, and the temperature so cold your breath crystallizes before your eyes. Now picture this: you have no fire, no warm shelters, no glowing embers, no cooked food. Just your bare survival instincts against an unforgiving ice age. How did hunter-gatherers endure 30,000 years of ice without the one thing we consider essential? Fire. Close your eyes and imagine stepping into a world 30,000 years ago. The ground crunches beneath your feet, not with grass or leaves, but with hardened snow and jagged ice. The sun is dim, filtered through a veil of clouds, casting a pale light across endless white horizons. Temperatures often plunged far below freezing, and in some places, they barely rose above it even in summer. For our ancestors, this was everyday reality. The Ice Age wasn't just cold, it was relentless. Massive glaciers carved through continents, shifting the land itself. Forests shrank, grasslands expanded, and entire regions became barren tundra. Where you might expect fertile valleys or rivers teeming with life, much of the land was locked in a frozen grip. Imagine walking for days without seeing a single tree tall enough to provide real shelter, or finding only frozen streams when you desperately need water. Welcome to Before Flame. Fire. If you enjoyed traveling back in time with me, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you never miss the next journey into our ancient past. The cold wasn't the only enemy. The Ice Age environment was filled with enormous animals: woolly mammoths, saber-toothed cats, giant sloths. They weren't just background scenery, they were both threats and opportunities. A single mammoth could feed a tribe for weeks, but hunting one without fire meant no cooked meat, no torches, no warmth to rely on in the chase. Every step was a gamble between life and death. And yet, humans endured. They had no fire to chase away the darkness at night, no steady warmth to keep frostbite from gnawing at their skin. Their survival depended on learning to read the land, to use every scrap of nature to their advantage. Before we explore their clever strategies, we first need to understand this icy world in which every breath was a test of resilience. For Ice Age hunter-gatherers, every single day was a fight for survival. Hunger was constant. With fire absent, food sources had to be eaten raw, which limited options. Imagine biting into raw, frozen meat, tough, sinewy, and cold enough to crack teeth. Berries and plants were scarce in the frozen tundra, so people relied heavily on animals. But even catching prey came with dangers. A failed hunt meant not just hunger, but possibly death from exhaustion or exposure. The cold was unrelenting. Without fire, there was no way to properly warm themselves at night. Sleeping meant huddling together in shelters made from animal skins, snow, or bone structures. They layered hides, wrapped themselves tightly, and used body heat to survive. Even then, frostbite and hypothermia were constant threats. Can you imagine waking up in the middle of the night with your fingers so numb you could barely move them, knowing you had to survive another day in that state? That was reality. And then, there were the predators. Saber-toothed cats lurked in the shadows, waiting for the weak or the wounded. Packs of dire wolves prowled the frozen plains. Without fire to scare them off, humans had to rely on numbers, weapons, and vigilance. Nights were especially dangerous. No flickering flames to keep the beasts at bay, only silence broken by the distant howls of predators circling closer. Each day was a cycle: hunt, gather, protect, survive. There was no guarantee of tomorrow. And yet, these humans pushed forward, learning to adapt to conditions that would break most of us today. Their determination wasn't optional. It was the only reason their blood runs in our veins now. Physical endurance kept hunter-gatherers alive, but it was their mental resilience that truly carried them through. Imagine living in a world where every sunrise brought uncertainty. You didn't know if you'd find food, if predators would strike, or if a sudden storm would bury your shelter. That kind of life could easily crush the human spirit. And yet, these people found ways to adapt, not just physically, but psychologically. Community played a huge role. Survival wasn't a solo mission, it was deeply collective. Families and small tribes worked together, sharing whatever food or resources they had. They leaned on each other for warmth, protection, and emotional support. In many ways, their greatest weapon wasn't a spear, it was trust. Without fire to comfort them, humans found comfort in each other. Adaptability was another defining trait. When faced with scarce food, they shifted diets. When predators threatened, they developed better weapons and group hunting strategies. When the cold grew worse, they found new ways to layer hides or improve shelters. Instead of resisting the Ice Age, they learned to bend with it, to adapt to the rhythms of nature rather than fight against them. Psychologically, they must have also drawn strength from meaning and culture. Even in this frozen world, evidence shows humans carved figurines, painted cave walls, and created symbols. Why would they do that when survival was so difficult? Because the human spirit craves more than food and warmth. It craves stories, identity, and hope. These rituals weren't just art. They were survival tools, strengthening community bonds and reminding them why they endured. Against all odds, their resilience allowed them to face an environment we can barely imagine. This wasn't just survival. It was the foundation of human endurance. When you strip fire away from the human toolkit, shelter becomes absolutely critical. Without warmth from flames, Ice Age hunter-gatherers had to rely on the earth itself to protect them. And nature, while harsh, offered clever solutions for those resourceful enough to see them. Caves were the first line of defense. Tucked into cliffs and rocky hillsides, caves shielded humans from howling winds and predators. Inside, temperatures stayed more stable than in the open tundra. But caves weren't always perfect. Some were already occupied by bears or lions, making them dangerous to claim. Still, for those who managed to secure them, caves were life-saving sanctuaries. Where caves weren't available, ingenuity took over. Archaeological evidence shows Ice Age humans building structures out of mammoth bones and tusks, covered with animal hides to block out the cold. Imagine walking into a dwelling made from the skeleton of a giant, with hides stretched like thick curtains over bone frames. It wasn't pretty, but it was warm enough to mean survival. And then there was snow. The very thing that threatened to bury them could also save them. Like the Inuit much later, some Ice Age people likely used snow and ice to create shelters. Snow, when packed right, acts as insulation, trapping heat inside. A dome-shaped snow hut could reduce exposure to wind chill, and with bodies huddled inside, temperatures could rise above freezing even in a world that was far below it. These shelters weren't just practical, they were proof of human adaptability. Where others would see only cold, hostile landscapes, our ancestors saw building materials. In a world without fire, their survival depended on turning the environment itself into protection. If shelter was their shield against the cold, clothing was their second skin. Without fire to warm them, Ice Age humans relied heavily on animal hides and furs, transforming them into protective armor against freezing winds. Imagine wrapping yourself in the thick pelt of a mammoth or reindeer, not for fashion, but for sheer survival. Layer upon layer, stitched together with bone needles and sinew thread, became the difference between life and death. But clothing wasn't just about staying warm. It allowed mobility. A hunter couldn't simply hide inside a cave all winter. They had to step out into the tundra to find food. Warm, flexible garments made it possible to move, stalk prey, and endure long treks through snow. Over time, humans refined their clothing designs. Soft inner furs against the skin, tougher hides on the outside, sometimes even tailored with surprisingly advanced stitching. This wasn't primitive, it was practical engineering. Then came tools, the silent heroes of Ice Age survival. Spears tipped with sharpened stone, bone harpoons for fishing, scrapers to clean hides. These weren't luxuries, they were lifelines. Without fire to harden wood or cook food, tools became even more critical. Hunting meant closing the distance with predators far stronger and faster than humans. Imagine a group of hunters circling a massive bison, armed only with spears and courage, knowing one wrong move could mean being trampled or gored. And yet, they succeeded. Clothing gave them insulation, tools gave them power. Together, they extended human reach into some of the harshest environments Earth has ever known. The absence of fire didn't weaken them, it forced them to innovate, to push the limits of what raw determination and creativity could achieve. If you think skipping fire only meant shivering in the cold, think again, it also meant eating raw. Cooking wasn't an option, so Ice Age humans had to rely on their teeth, guts, and ingenuity to handle a diet that most of us today wouldn't survive for a single week. Raw meat was the backbone of their sustenance. Fresh kills provided immediate energy, but raw flesh wasn't easy to chew or digest. To make it easier, they sliced it thin, sometimes pounding it with stones to soften the fibers. Fat-rich parts, marrow, organs, blubber, were especially prized because they delivered warmth through calories. In frozen regions, fat wasn't just food, it was insulation for the body from the inside out. But survival wasn't just about eating, it was about storing food for the lean times. Without fire, preservation took creative forms. The cold itself acted like a natural freezer, keeping meat edible for weeks. Some groups may have buried food beneath snow or stored it in ice crevices. Salt deposits, where available, added another layer of preservation. In short, nature itself became their refrigerator. And here's where the human advantage shined brightest: group survival. A lone hunter could never endure the Ice Age, but together, tribes pooled resources, shared meals, and rotated duties. If one person fell sick or injured, others carried the load. Children learned by watching, women and men both hunted and gathered, and elders passed down knowledge. The absence of fire forced them into tighter bonds, where survival depended not just on strength, but on trust. What we see here is more than survival. It's community resilience at its peak. Without fire, they didn't just endure, they leaned on each other to make the impossible possible. Picture this: 30,000 years ago, a small band of humans faced snowstorms, predators, and hunger with nothing but bone tools, animal skins, and sheer willpower. Now fast forward to today, we complain when the Wi-Fi goes down, or when the heating system breaks for a single night. The contrast is staggering. Our Ice Age ancestors were masters of resilience. They had no fire, no electricity, no packaged food, and yet they adapted to one of the harshest climates in Earth's history. Every aspect of their lives demanded problem-solving. They turned bones into shelters, hides into clothing, and raw meat into sustenance. Every hardship sharpened their ability to endure. Their survival wasn't based on comfort, but on grit. Now look at us. Our survival depends heavily on technology, not in a bad way, but in a way that shows just how far we've drifted from raw resilience. A simple power outage can leave modern cities in chaos. Food spoils, heating stops, and communication collapses. Without technology, most of us would be paralyzed. The very tools that make life easier have also made us more fragile. This comparison doesn't mean we're weaker as people. It highlights how much we've come to rely on external systems. Where our ancestors trusted instincts and community, we place trust in digital networks and machines. Imagine stripping it all away for just 1 week. No phones, no electricity, no heating. Could most of us endure even a fraction of what they did daily? Our ancestors remind us that resilience is not just about survival skills, it's about mindset. They lived in constant uncertainty, yet they adapted, innovated, and endured. That's a lesson worth reflecting on in a world where convenience often replaces strength. When we look back at hunter-gatherers of the Ice Age, one truth stands out clearly: no one survived alone. Their greatest survival tool wasn't a weapon or a shelter, it was community. In a frozen, fireless world, they learned that strength came from cooperation. Food was shared, responsibilities rotated, and decisions made collectively. One person might falter, but the group endured. That's a lesson for us today, in a society that often glorifies individualism while underestimating the power of unity. Adaptability was another cornerstone of their survival. The environment was never static. Seasons shifted, herds migrated, predators lurked, and landscapes changed with the glaciers. Instead of resisting change, Ice Age humans bent with it. If resources grew scarce in one area, they moved. If a hunting strategy failed, they refined it. This flexibility, the willingness to adapt quickly and without hesitation, was their shield against extinction. Contrast that with modern life, where even small disruptions can leave us feeling overwhelmed. Resourcefulness tied it all together. These people looked at the world differently. To us, a pile of bones might seem like waste, but to them, it was raw material for tools, weapons, even shelters. A layer of snow wasn't just a hazard, it was insulation. The same environment that threatened their lives also provided the keys to survival, if only they were creative enough to see them. The Ice Age didn't hand out comfort. It demanded ingenuity, cooperation, and adaptability. And in rising to that challenge, our ancestors left us more than their DNA, they left us a blueprint for resilience. These are not just ancient survival tactics, they are timeless principles we can still apply in our modern struggles. Now let's imagine ourselves suddenly stripped of fire, just like our Ice Age ancestors. No stoves, no heaters, no hot water, no electricity. What happens first? Most of us would panic. The food in our kitchens would spoil quickly. Cold nights would become unbearable without heating. Our routines, from morning coffee to evening meals, would collapse. Something as ordinary as boiling water would suddenly feel like a lost art. But here's the bigger question. Could we adapt the way they did? The truth is, most of us have grown comfortable relying on technology that shields us from discomfort. Yet, if pushed into survival mode, the same human instincts our ancestors relied on still lie dormant within us. We are, after all, their descendants. Their resilience flows in our veins. The real takeaway isn't just about surviving without fire. It's about appreciating how fragile our dependence on modern systems can make us. Their survival reminds us that humans are not inherently weak. We've just shifted where we place our strength. We lean on technology rather than instinct, on individual independence rather than tight-knit communities. Perhaps the greatest lesson the Ice Age teaches us is humility. We are not invincible, but we are adaptable, profoundly so. Strip away fire, strip away technology, and humans still have the potential to innovate, cooperate, and endure. That's the legacy of those hunter-gatherers who braved a frozen world without flames. So next time you sit by a warm fire, or even switch on your heater, remember, comfort is new. Survival is ancient. And the people who came before us showed that with enough adaptability, community, and courage, even the coldest world can be endured. For 30,000 years, hunter-gatherers survived the Ice Age without the one thing we now see as essential: fire. They built shelters from bones and snow, wrapped themselves in hides, ate raw food, and leaned on each other for survival. Their story isn't just about enduring the cold, it's about resilience, adaptability, and the power of community. Today, we live in comfort they could never have imagined. Yet their struggles remind us of something important. Survival isn't about tools or technology alone. It's about mindset, creativity, and unity. Fire made life easier when it finally came, but even without it, humans found a way to endure. And maybe that's the most powerful lesson of all. We are capable of more than we think, even when everything we rely on is stripped away. So let me leave you with this. If tomorrow you had to live without fire, without heat, without the comforts of modern life, how long do you think you'd survive?